Have you ever wondered why some attractions feel less like a gentle pull and more like an inescapable current, sweeping you into depths you never intended to explore? There exists a potent, often terrifying, alchemy when the pursuit of another transforms into an all-consuming fire, burning away the boundaries of self and reason. This isn't the tender burgeoning of love. It is the obsession's embrace, a primal force that can chain one soul to another, not by mutual desire, but by a relentless, unyielding need. It's the silent scream of the psyche, yearning for completion through another, a completion that remains perpetually out of reach, fueling a cycle of yearning and despair. This consuming fixation often stems from a wound so deep, so primal, that it cries out for external validation, mistaking another's presence for the missing piece of one's own fractured self. It is a psychological labyrinth, intricate and treacherous, where the shadow self often plays puppeteer, pulling at the threads of attachment and fear, leading one further into a mirage of connection. Elara had always been drawn to the intense, the enigmatic. Her childhood had been a tapestry woven with threads of neglect and unfulfilled promises, leaving her with an insatiable hunger for unwavering affection. She carried a quiet ache, a void that echoed with the absence of consistent love. This void, a fertile ground for the seeds of obsession, found its perfect match in Reese. He was a musician, a solitary figure with eyes that held the depth of ancient forests and a voice that could stir forgotten memories. From the moment she heard him play, a haunting melody that seemed to speak directly to her soul, Elara felt a seismic shift within her. It wasn't just admiration. It was an instantaneous, visceral recognition, as if he held the key to a part of her she didn't even know was locked away. Their initial encounters were fleeting, a few shared words after his sets, a polite smile. But for Elara, these brief moments were charged with an electric significance. She began to orbit his life subtly at first. She learned his favorite coffee shop, the times he went for solitary walks, the small, obscure venues he played. Her days became meticulously choreographed around these fragments of his existence. Each accidental encounter, each fleeting glance, was meticulously dissected, replayed, and imbued with profound meaning. A simple nod from Reese became a sign of burgeoning affection, a casual conversation, a declaration of unspoken intimacy. Her inner world, once a quiet, melancholic landscape, erupted into a vibrant, feverish kaleidoscope, painted solely with his image. Friends noticed the change, the increasing isolation. "Elara, are you all right? You seem distant," her friend Lena observed one evening, concern etched on her face. Elara merely offered a vague excuse, her mind already drifting to Reese, wondering if he was practicing, if he was thinking of her. The subtle hints of warning, the gentle nudges towards self-awareness, were lost in the roar of her burgeoning obsession. Her life, once filled with her own creative pursuits and social connections, began to shrink, consumed by the relentless pursuit of his attention, however indirect. She found herself checking his social media endlessly, analyzing every post, every like, searching for clues, for validation, for any sign that she was as significant to him as he was to her. The silence from his end, the lack of reciprocation, instead of deterring her, fueled her resolve. She believed it was a test, a challenge to overcome, a deeper mystery to unravel. Her conviction grew that beneath his reserved exterior lay a passion mirroring her own, waiting to be unearthed by her unwavering devotion. One rainy afternoon, a pivotal moment occurred. Elara saw Reese at the local library, poring over a collection of ancient poetry. Her heart pounded, a frantic drumbeat against her ribs. This was it, the chance to connect on a deeper level, to show him their shared intellectual landscape. She approached him, a carefully crafted opening line rehearsed in her mind. But as she spoke, his gaze, which she had so often imagined filled with recognition and warmth, was merely polite, distant. He answered her questions courteously, but there was no spark, no hint of the profound connection she felt. He excused himself, citing an appointment, and vanished into the stacks, leaving Elara standing amidst the quiet hum of the library, a profound chill seeping into her bones. The carefully constructed edifice of her hope began to crack. The realization, when it finally hit her, was a brutal, disorienting blow. The Reese she had obsessed over, the Reese who held the answers to her inner void, was a phantom, a projection of her own unmet needs and desires. He was not the key. He was merely the canvas upon which she had painted her longing. The profound emptiness she had sought to fill through him yawned wider, more terrifying than before. The subtle plot twist, the gradual unfolding of his emotional unavailability, led to this main climax of self-confrontation. The intensity of her disappointment was inversely proportional to the intensity of her prior hope. The realization that his indifference was not a test, but genuine, was a stark and painful truth. She had woven an intricate web of fantasy, mistaking a polite acquaintance for a soulmate. The silence that followed his departure was deafening, the silence of a dream shattering, leaving only echoes of a frantic, one-sided pursuit. In the aftermath, Elara felt a profound sense of humiliation and despair. Her carefully constructed world, built on the shifting sands of obsession, crumbled. The emotional atmosphere, once a feverish hope, now settled into a deep, pervasive loneliness. The shame was almost unbearable, the recognition of how far she had strayed from herself in the pursuit of another's shadow. Yet, within this desolation, a tiny, defiant spark flickered. It was the whisper of her true self, long silenced by the clamor of obsession, finally making itself heard. The pain was a bitter medicine, forcing her to look inward, to confront the gaping wound that had made her so susceptible to such a powerful, destructive fixation. The emptiness was still there, but now, instead of running from it, she felt a strange, terrifying urge to finally turn and face it. The story ends not with a triumphant resolution, but with the quiet, courageous dawn of self-awareness, the first tentative steps towards reclaiming a self long lost in the relentless pursuit of another's fleeting reflection. This archetype, often described as the pure eternus or puella aeterna in its more challenging manifestation, demonstrates a profound reluctance to engage with the demands of adult reality, often clinging to an idealized, unattainable vision of love or connection. The character, deeply entrenched in a psyche yearning for an external other to complete them, projects their inner anima or animus onto the object of their obsession. This isn't merely attraction. It's a desperate attempt to integrate a missing piece of their own psyche, a shadow element they perceive as residing within another. The pain she experienced was not from a rejection by Reese, but from the brutal collision of her projected fantasy with the indifferent reality. Her profound yearning for connection was not truly for him, but for the elusive wholeness she believed he embodied. The theme here is the perilous dance of projection, where the unconscious mind, seeking integration, casts its own unfulfilled aspects onto another, creating an illusion of profound connection that is ultimately unsustainable. Consider the words of Carl Jung, who posited that everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Her obsession with Reese was a mirror, albeit a distorted one, reflecting her own deep-seated need for validation, her unaddressed childhood wounds, and her desperate search for wholeness outside herself. The character's journey, while painful, is a nascent step towards individuation, the process of becoming a whole and integrated person. For you, dear viewer, if you find yourself entangled in the tendrils of such an all-consuming attraction, pause. Ask yourself, whose needs am I truly trying to meet? Is this person truly seen for who they are? Or are they a vessel for your unfulfilled desires, a canvas for your projected fantasies? This relentless pursuit of another often masks a deeper, unaddressed wound within. It is a desperate cry from the shadow self, yearning for recognition and integration. The solution lies not in pursuing the external, but in turning inward. Begin the arduous yet ultimately liberating work of shadow work. Explore the origins of this insatiable need. What past pain, what unmet longing, drives this desperate search for external validation? Embrace the profound courage it takes to sit with your own discomfort, your own loneliness, rather than seeking to fill it with the fleeting illusion of another's presence. Understand that true strength, true peace, arises not from finding another to complete you, but from discovering the profound wellspring of wholeness already residing within. Cultivate self-worth not as a byproduct of external affection, but as an inherent, unshakable truth. Embrace the stoic wisdom of self-reliance, recognizing that your emotional well-being is your sole responsibility. The path to freedom from obsession's embrace is the path back to yourself, a journey of profound self-discovery and radical self-acceptance. Has this ever happened to you, where the intensity of a connection feels so profound, so utterly faded, that you convince yourself it must be love, even when all evidence points to a far more destructive dynamic? This is the insidious second face of obsession, where the primal force morphs into a relentless pursuit of validation, often cloaked in the guise of genuine affection. It's a desperate attempt to fill a void not just with another person, but with their approval, their attention, their confirmation of your very existence. The line between wanting to be loved and needing to be seen becomes irrevocably blurred, transforming every interaction into a test, every silence into a judgment, and every fleeting glance into a potential sign of rejection. This obsessive need for external validation is a suffocating blanket, smothering genuine connection and leading only to deeper cycles of anxiety and self-doubt. It speaks to a profound lack of an inner anchor, a self-worth that has been outsourced, leaving one perpetually adrift on the turbulent seas of another's perceptions. Isolde had always been a quiet storm, her sensitivity a double-edged sword. As a child, she learned early that emotional expression often led to dismissal, even ridicule. Her parents, well-meaning but emotionally distant, instilled in her a subtle yet pervasive belief that her inherent worth was conditional, tied to her achievements and her ability to please. This laid the groundwork for a deeply insecure adult, one who constantly sought external mirrors to reflect her value. When she met Jungian, a charismatic and effortlessly charming artist, she felt a resonance she'd never known. He saw her, truly saw her, or so she believed. He listened intently, his gaze unwavering, and his words were always laced with encouragement and admiration. Isolde blossomed under his attention, feeling, for the first time, truly alive and appreciated. Their relationship began with a whirlwind of passion and intellectual fireworks. Jungian, a master of grand gestures, would write her poetic letters, compose songs inspired by her, and speak of their destined connection. Isolde, starved for such overt affection, drank it in like a parched traveler in a desert. She became increasingly dependent on his validation, her moods fluctuating wildly with the ebb and flow of his attention. A text message sent without an immediate reply could plunge her into despair. A slight shift in his tone of voice could trigger a cascade of self-doubt. She began to filter her own thoughts and opinions through the lens of his potential reaction, silencing parts of herself to maintain his approval. Her life, once vibrant with her own creative pursuits and friendships, slowly became a satellite orbiting Jungian's universe. Her art, once a source of deep personal expression, became an offering meticulously crafted to elicit his praise. The first subtle cracks in this gilded cage appeared when Jungian, true to his artistic temperament, became increasingly absorbed in his own projects. His attention, once boundless, grew sporadic. He missed dates, became forgetful of their conversations, and his grand gestures became fewer and farther between. Isolde, instead of confronting this shift, internalized it as a failing on her part. She redoubled her efforts to please him, baking his favorite desserts, arranging elaborate surprises, and catering to his every whim. She believed that if she could just be enough, if she could just prove her unwavering devotion, his attention would return. The emotional atmosphere in their relationship shifted from joyful communion to an anxious, relentless chase. She found herself scrutinizing every word, every gesture, searching for reassurance, convinced that if she could decode the hidden meaning, she could fix whatever was wrong. This obsession with his validation became a torment, a constant internal monologue of self-recrimination and desperate strategizing. One particularly poignant evening, Jungian arrived late to a dinner Isolde had painstakingly prepared. He was distracted, constantly checking his phone, his mind clearly elsewhere. When she gently tried to engage him, to rekindle the spark that once defined them. He sighed, a dismissive sound that pierced her to the core. "Isolde," he said without looking up. "Can we just not? I've had a long day." In that moment, a chilling clarity dawned on her. It wasn't just that he was distracted. It was his complete indifference to her efforts, her pain, her very presence. The meticulously built illusion of their fated connection shattered, revealing the stark reality. She was not seen, not valued, but merely another fixture in his self-absorbed world. This was the mini-climax, the initial crack in her carefully constructed reality. The full, devastating impact of this realization came weeks later, after a particularly bruising argument where Julian, exasperated by her pleas for attention, finally snapped, "Honestly, Isolde, you're suffocating me. Why can't you just be happy with yourself?" His words, though cruel, were a brutal truth. The main climax of her journey wasn't a grand confrontation, but a quiet, internal implosion. She saw herself, truly saw herself, through his indifferent eyes. A woman desperate for affirmation, her identity dissolving into the relentless pursuit of another's approval. The mirror he held up was not one of love, but of her own profound insecurity. The pain was immense, not just the pain of his rejection, but the agony of confronting the vast emptiness within herself that had driven her to such extremes. She had sacrificed her autonomy, her very essence, on the altar of his fleeting attention. The story ends with Isolde sitting alone in her apartment, surrounded by the remnants of her efforts to please him. The silence echoing not with despair, but with a nascent, terrifying understanding. The emotional atmosphere shifted from anxious pleading to a quiet, profound reckoning. The first breath of air after suffocating in another's shadow. The tears that finally came were not just for the lost relationship, but for the lost parts of herself, tears that held the bittersweet promise of healing. The character of Isolde embodies the echo archetype, a psychological pattern where one's identity is largely defined by reflection and response to others, particularly a dominant figure. This is often rooted in early experiences of conditional love, leading to a deep-seated fear of abandonment and an insatiable need for external validation. Her constant pursuit of Julian's approval, her chameleon-like adaptation to his desires, and her willingness to self-erase for his attention are classic manifestations. This isn't merely a personal flaw. It is a profound wound in the ego, leaving it fragile and dependent on external feedback for a sense of worth. The theme explored here is the dangerous allure of ego projection, where one's own sense of inadequacy is projected onto another, making their approval the sole arbiter of one's value. The intense emotional investment in Julian was less about who he genuinely was and more about what he represented, a source of external validation that could momentarily quiet her inner critic. Carl Jung spoke extensively about the shadow, the repressed aspects of our personality. Isolde's relentless need for validation was a manifestation of her unacknowledged shadow of unworthiness, constantly seeking external light to dispel its darkness. Her journey, though painful, is a critical step towards individuation, the process of integrating these fragmented parts of the self. Julian's blunt truth, while harsh, served as a catalyst, forcing her to confront the reality of her own lack of an inner anchor. For you, the viewer, if you find yourself perpetually seeking external validation, constantly checking the emotional temperature of those around you, or feeling your worth rise and fall with the tides of another's approval, understand this. You are caught in the powerful current of outsourcing your self-worth. This constant external gaze prevents you from truly knowing and valuing yourself. The solution lies not in finding the right person to validate you, but in cultivating an unshakable inner foundation. Begin by recognizing that your worth is inherent, not conditional. It is not earned. It simply is. Practice radical self-acceptance, acknowledging your perceived flaws and imperfections not as reasons for external rejection, but as integral parts of your unique tapestry. Embrace Stoicism's emphasis on internal locus of control. You cannot control others' opinions or actions, but you can control your response and your perception of yourself. Start small. Make decisions based on your own values, not on what you think others expect. Engage in activities solely for your own pleasure and growth, not to impress anyone. This process is akin to shadow work, shining a light on the hidden parts of yourself that fear unworthiness. Reclaim your emotional sovereignty. Your happiness, your peace, your sense of value are not commodities to be granted or withheld by another. They are your birthright, waiting to be rediscovered and nurtured from within. What would you think if I told you that the most potent form of obsession isn't born from attraction, but from a wound so profound it seeks to annihilate the self in the service of another? This is the darkest facet of obsession's embrace, where the primal force becomes a consuming fire, not merely for validation, but for dissolution, a desperate attempt to escape the unbearable burden of one's own existence by merging entirely with another. It is the ultimate act of psychological surrender, a profound misunderstanding of love as self-sacrifice to the point of extinction. This form of obsession often stems from deeply embedded trauma, a fundamental rupture in the sense of self that makes one's own inner world feel dangerous, unlovable, or simply too painful to inhabit. In this space, the other becomes a sanctuary, a reason to exist, and the boundaries between self and other evaporate, leaving one vulnerable to profound exploitation and emotional annihilation. It is the terrifying culmination of a lifelong flight from the self, seeking refuge in the perceived wholeness of another. Anya's childhood was a fractured mosaic of unpredictable outbursts and chilling silences. Her mother, a volatile perfectionist, had unwittingly instilled in Anya a core belief. Her existence was inherently problematic, a source of constant disappointment. To survive, Anya learned to become invisible, to anticipate needs, to smooth over rough edges, all to avoid the crushing weight of her mother's disapproval. This ingrained pattern of self-erasure left Anya a young woman with a gaping chasm where her sense of self should have been, a profound emotional emptiness that pulsed with the quiet terror of being truly seen. She gravitated towards relationships where she could lose herself, where her primary role was to serve, to soothe, to anticipate. This was her familiar emotional terrain, a perverse comfort in self-abnegation. When she met Marcus, a man whose charm was as potent as his inner demons, she felt an immediate, terrifying pull. He was brilliant, captivating, but also deeply troubled, prone to dark moods and erratic behavior. For Anya, this wasn't a red flag. It was an invitation, a familiar call to arms. Here was someone who needed her, truly needed her, and in his need, she saw a purpose, a justification for her very existence. Their relationship quickly spiraled into a vortex of intense highs and crushing lows. Marcus, with his artistic temperament and unresolved traumas, was a demanding partner. He relied on Anya for everything: emotional support, practical assistance, validation of his creative genius. Anya, in turn, devoted herself entirely to him. She anticipated his moods, managed his anxieties, and celebrated his smallest triumphs as if they were her own. Her own dreams, her own friends, her own sense of self began to wither under the relentless sun of his needs. She became his shadow, her identity so intertwined with his that she felt she ceased to exist outside of their dynamic. When he was happy, she was elated. When he was angry, she was terrified. When he was distant, she felt a profound, existential dread. Her life was no longer her own. It was a constant performance, a delicate balancing act designed to maintain his approval, to keep the storm at bay. The emotional atmosphere was a suffocating blend of manufactured peace and simmering anxiety, punctuated by explosive arguments that left Anya feeling like a discarded husk. The insidious nature of this dynamic was revealed in small, chilling acts. Marcus would often belittle her opinions, dismiss her feelings, or subtly manipulate her into believing that his struggles were her responsibility. Anya, desperate to maintain the illusion of being needed, absorbed these blows, internalizing his criticisms as her own failings. She truly believed that if she were just better, just more devoted, just more selfless, she could finally earn the unconditional love she craved. The first mini-climax occurred during a particularly volatile argument where Marcus, in a fit of rage, told her she was nothing without him. The words, meant to wound, instead struck a terrifying chord of truth within Anya. A sliver of clarity pierced the fog of her self-abnegation, a chilling recognition that she had, indeed, become nothing. But instead of empowering her, this revelation only deepened her fear of abandonment, making her cling to him tighter, convinced that dissolution was her only path to survival. The true climax, however, was a quiet, insidious one, far more devastating than any explosive confrontation. Marcus, facing a personal crisis, withdrew completely, retreating into himself and pushing Anya away. For weeks, he barely spoke to her, his silence a palpable wall. Anya, stripped of her purpose, found herself adrift in a terrifying void. She tried everything to reach him, to re-establish their connection, to re-earn her perceived worth. She called, she wrote, she begged for his attention, but he remained impenetrable. One desolate morning, as the sun streamed through her window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, Anya looked at her reflection in the mirror. Her eyes, once bright, were dull and haunted. She saw a stranger, a ghostly outline of a woman who had poured every drop of her being into another, only to find herself utterly, terrifyingly empty. She recognized, with a gut-wrenching certainty, that her identity had been entirely consumed. The profound emptiness she had tried to escape by merging with Marcus now echoed louder than ever, a hollow chamber where her soul once resided. She realized, with devastating clarity, that in her relentless pursuit of him, she had completely abandoned herself. The story ends not with a dramatic break, but with the chilling stillness of a complete internal collapse, a recognition of profound self-loss that, paradoxically, contained the faintest whisper of a forgotten self. Anya's journey illustrates the perilous landscape of the sacrificial archetype taken to its extreme, often rooted in early relational trauma that teaches the individual their value is derived from their utility or service to others. This character operates from a deep-seated belief that their inherent self is flawed, unlovable, or simply too much, leading to a compulsive desire to annihilate the ego in the service of another's needs. This is a desperate, unconscious attempt to find safety and belonging by becoming indispensable. Her obsession with Marcus wasn't about control, but about absolute surrender, a distorted form of the Anima's yearning for a unifying, masculine force, but here twisted into a destructive dependency. The theme at play is the ultimate consequence of avoiding shadow work. The unacknowledged and unintegrated parts of the self, her own power, her own voice, her own inherent worth, are projected away, leaving a void that another person is expected to fill, often at a terrible cost. This psychological self-erasure is a tragic attempt to heal old wounds through external means, leading to a profound loss of individuation. Carl Jung famously stated, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Anya's deep-seated trauma, her shadow of unworthiness, demanded to be made conscious. Her intense need to serve Marcus was a symptom of this unaddressed wound, a desperate plea for external validation that could only be truly satisfied from within. Her profound self-loss, though devastating, was the necessary crucible for an eventual rebirth of self. For you, dear listener, if you recognize in Anya's story the unsettling echoes of your own experience, a tendency to lose yourself in relationships, to prioritize another's needs above your own, to feel your worth is tied to your self-sacrifice, know this. You are caught in the powerful undertow of self-annihilation through obsession. This is not love. It is a desperate attempt to find a sense of purpose and safety by dissolving your boundaries. The solution lies not in finding a better person to serve, but in the courageous act of reclaiming your sovereignty. Begin the arduous, yet profoundly liberating, work of confronting the trauma psychology that has taught you to fear your own inherent worth. Ask yourself, what pain am I trying to avoid by disappearing into another? What are the hidden parts of yourself that you have neglected or deemed unworthy? Engage in profound shadow work, bringing compassionately to light the beliefs that have driven you to outsource your entire existence. Embrace Dale Carnegie principles, not to manipulate others, but to build authentic connections and to advocate for your own needs with clarity and confidence. The path forward demands radical self-compassion and the unwavering commitment to reparent yourself. This means consciously choosing to nourish your own needs, to listen to your own voice, and to understand that your inherent value is not earned through sacrifice, but is a given. Stoicism offers a powerful framework here. Focus on what is within your control, your responses, your self-perception, your choices, and bravely let go of the desperate need to control another's affection or perception of you. The end of this destructive cycle is the beginning of a profound inner rebirth, a transformation where you finally understand that true strength lies not in merging with another, but in standing firmly, authentically, and compassionately within your own radiant self. Like, comment, and subscribe to the channel, and share this video with others to spread positive values in life. Thank you for listening. The end.